TV show, the #1 labor TV program in New York City, the #1 community TV program in New York City. And as promised, I have a special guest today. Someone who's running for mayor of New York City. We're going to be asking him some questions. We're going to get to it. This is going to be big. A lot of viewers go view this one because we normally don't talk about politics and have them come on the show, but I couldn't turn this one down because I've been following this man for so many years, and it's going to be a pleasure for me to interview him and see what his plans are for the city of New York. So, Mr. Sliwa, how are you doing today? You gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
I've been busy here on the Upper West Side where there were a bunch of shootings last night, so it's kept me very busy. I sample the nightlife in the streets. My adversary, Eric Adams, is sampling nightlife in the suites. It's almost like role reversal.
I did see you on the ground ducking for cover the other day. I was like, what is Mr. Sliwa doing down there? But I get it. Can you give the people a brief introduction of who you are and what you represent? Just a brief introduction as far as with the Guardian Angels and stuff like that.
Sure. I started the Guardian Angels back in February of 1979 when I was a night manager of Mickey D's McDonald's up in the Bronx on Fordham and Webster. And that's because of all the crime. Before that, I had run a series of cleanup programs, recycling programs, where everybody loved it. They say, "Oh, that's all American. That's something we want to recognize. That's something we want to award." And we received a numerous awards up in the Bronx for making for a cleaner Bronx. But I realized that wasn't the #1 problem. The #1 problem, bar none, was dealing with the gangs and the crime. And because New York City was facing fiscal collapse, bankruptcy, the mayor, who was incoming at that time, Ed Koch, had to make draconian cuts in the budget. So they had to lay off transit police officers at night, uniformed officers in the off-peak hours, which resulted in no cops patrolling from 7 p.m. at night to 5 a.m. in the morning. And that just added to the craziness and anarchy that prevailed in the subways. And I decided, hey, I know how to organize volunteers. I do it to clean the streets, to recycle garbage. I'll just organize volunteers to patrol the trains. Little did I realize that it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. In fact, I thought initially, wow, this is a great thing. I'm going to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. I couldn't have been closely wrong. I was able to convince my closing crew at McDonald's that once we closed the store at about 2 a.m, we should patrol the nearby #4 train, which had been nicknamed the Muggers Express by the rioters because of all the crime, till about 6 a.m. And that was the time when most of the violent crimes were taking place. So we went out there, we started a patrol at the very same time that the Warriors movie came out, which became a cult movie classic about gangs on the subways. And so people were immediately thinking, oh, Warriors come out and play. This is just another gang that's on the subways. And then there were people calling us Charlie's Angels. But the worst was Eric Koch, who had just been elected, was referring to us as not only a gang, but vigilantes, and said that he would not allow us to patrol the trains at night. And the police actually went out there and started arresting us and harassing us and treating us as if we were criminals. Now, remember, we were unarmed. We had no special powers or privileges. I was able to convince Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, males and females to patrol together as a unit. And within the course of the first 13 years, I was arrested myself 76 times.
Wow.
6 times I was given at times wooden shampoos, concrete facials, attitudinal readjustments. We talk about Rikers Island now. I was locked up on the Rock back in the 80s. I was in the Bronx House of Detention when it was open, Queens House of Detention, Brooklyn House of Detention, 100 Skimmerhorn Street, Gold Street, you name it. The cops were harassing us and locking me up. And it wasn't until 1992 to 1993 when Rudy Giuliani beat then Mayor David Dinkins that all of that stopped. He embraced us. He said, why are we arresting the Guardian Angels? They haven't hurt anybody. 6 Guardian Angels been shot and killed in the line of duty. Curtis Sliwa himself was shot 5 times with hollow point bullets on the orders of John Gotti Sr. to John Gotti Jr. and the Gambino crime family. So why are we harassing the Guardian Angels? And so he issued an operational order to the NYPD to cease and desist. And we haven't had a problem till this day. We're now in 13 countries, 130 cities. And the Guardian Angels are local young men, young women, or adults who go through the same training we do here in New York City, wear the same uniform. So it is the same concept that is spread globally, but it all started in the Bronx in February of 1979.
All right, so let me ask you, you're running as the Republican candidate for mayor of New York City. What made you choose now to jump into politics, basically?
I've never run for a political office. Previous to running as a Republican for the mayoralty, I was the chairman of the New York State Reform Party. It's a third party for 3 years. Andrew Cuomo had a war against the Working Families Party. He tried to wipe them out because they ran Cynthia Nixon, the actress, against him in the Democratic primary. Instead of destroying them, he actually strengthened them. So the only surviving third parties were the Conservative Party and the Working Families Party, because he raised the threshold of the number of votes that you had to get in order to maintain your status. So we lost the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, my party, the New York State Reform Party, the Independence Party. So now I'm running as a Republican who won the primary. I had an opponent. His name was Fernando Mateo. He was the Trump candidate. I was a never Trumper. In fact, Fernando Mateo spent $2 million telling everybody that Curtis Lee was not a real Republican and he's a never Trump. Both of that was true. But I beat him anyway, 70% in the primary. And I also won the independent party line. So on November 2nd, when people were filling out their ballot to scan it, or if they're going to early voting 10 days earlier, or they're mailing in a ballot, you get a choice. You get to either vote for Curtis as a Republican or vote for Curtis on the independent party line. Because I understand there are a lot of Democrats and independents who would never vote for a Republican in a month of Sundays. If Jesus Christ, they wouldn't vote for him. But they would vote for the person if they liked the person, in my case, on the independent party line. The benefit I have is I'm a Republican who can go into neighborhoods where the only Republican they've ever seen is Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill. And I get respect. Not because people think of me as a Republican. They say, oh, that's Curtis. He's been here before. He's been here with the Guardian Angels. Yeah, I don't believe in everything he stands for ideologically, but I know he's a guy you can depend on. And I got the street cred. And that's something you can't buy if you raise millions and millions of dollars. If you were like Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire, notice he had no street cred. He couldn't buy street cred, even if he spent millions of dollars to do that. So that's my route to victory, in the streets and in the subways. Whereas in this case, this time around, the Democrat who normally controls the streets, he's actually where Republicans normally are, dealing with Wall Street, Fortune 500 companies, the wealthy, the Hamptons, Martha's Vineyard. He's up in the suites getting wine down the pocket line, and I'm riding the subways with a Metro card.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's say you become mayor, your first 90 days in office, how would a Curtis Sliwa-led city differ from an Eric Adams-led city? First 90 days.
All right, well, Eric Adams recently said if he's elected mayor on January 1st, on January 2nd, he would fly to Florida. And right away when he said that, I said, what is this, like when you win the Super Bowl, like Montana did for the San Francisco 49ers? And then they said, hey, what are you doing next? And he said, oh, I'm going to Disney World. No. What is he going to Florida for? He says he wants to convince people who fled to Florida to come back. Knock yourself out. They're not coming back. They already made the decision to leave. God bless them. They made that decision. Let them stay in Florida. What we got to do is convince people to improve, not to move, those that are already here. So January 2nd, if I'm elected mayor, I'm going to every police precinct in the city. I'm shaking the hands of the men and women in blue out in Tottenville to the first precinct right near the Holland Tunnel in Lower Manhattan, and letting them know, hey, we got to turn you back into heroes. I know for a long time you were relegated into being zeros, You got to give them a morale lift, a morale boost, because every time I'm at a crime scene, the cops now are reactive. They're not proactive. You can tell their morale is at an all-time low because this mayor, de Blasio, he just doesn't care. He's not out in the streets. Look how long it took him to visit Rikers Island with all the problems there. He hadn't been there in 4 years, and he had to be brought there, like kicking and screaming and complaining. Do your job.
Now we're gonna touch into. I got some questions for you regarding the NYPD, Rikers Island. Now I want to segue into COVID a little bit. COVID, it ravaged New York City, specifically speaking, the Black and brown communities. Why do you think those communities was hit harder than any other communities when it came to COVID?
Less trust in government. And that also takes place among some white people and Hispanic people, Asian people. There just is a sense that you cannot completely trust the government because they're always saying different things. And there's plenty of elected officials, Republican and Democrats, it's do as I say, but not as I do. There's also outreach. If you live in a wealthier community, you have more access to healthcare than if you live in a poorer community. So there are a number of reasons. But I think we're at a point now where elected officials, starting with our president, Joe Biden, starting with our brand new governor, Hochul, who replaced Cuomo, and de Blasio, where they're issuing these mandates, which to me are completely unfair.
You answering the question
you have
before
a job.
I even asked them. Go ahead.
Right. You have a job. Mm-hmm. Right. Let's say you have a medical condition that prevents you from getting a vaccine. Now we're going to tell you you can't work and you're going to be fired. And there are people with medical conditions. I didn't realize how many medical conditions there were out there until I went out on the campaign trail and I was complaining about having to wear a diaper on my face. And people afterwards would come up and say, Curtis, not for nothing, I got to wear 2-3 masks. I'm getting chemotherapy. If I don't protect myself, my immunity is so low, I could die from this. And I can't get a vaccine. I can't take the Moderna, the Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I have to be extraordinarily careful. I wasn't even thinking like that. Then there are people who are of strong religious belief, and their religious beliefs say you cannot get vaccinated. And then there are a lot of people who just don't trust the government. So my answer is, hey, look, I think there's a compromise here. And we're seeing it in some of the union jobs, but not all of them. If you're vaccinated, great. I encourage vaccination. I have been vaccinated. I would bribe people to get vaccinated, which the city has done by offering them $100. Some in private business have offered their employees $1,000. But if you don't want to get vaccinated or you can't get vaccinated, then just test them once a week.
So
don't take their job from them. Just test them once a week. Before we had the vaccine, remember, we were getting tested every week. I worked for WABC Talk Radio. I had the swizzle stick shoved up my schnoz every week. I didn't like it, but it was for the benefit of my fellow employees so that, God forbid, if I had COVID, I would be quarantined.
So you disagree what's happening to the New York City teachers right now with them being forced to be mandated? Because I was on Twitter the other day and someone asked, where's Curtis Sliwa? Where's Eric Adams? Are they waiting to get elected before taking the marching orders from Hochul? So I guess now you just answered the question for them that you're not waiting for no marching orders. You disagree with the mandate.
No, and I've said that repeatedly, except I'm not totally against testing. There are some people who say, my body, my choice. I don't want to get tested either. Well, I said, hey, wait a second. Okay, you're not vaccinated. Why wouldn't you want to be tested once a week? Before there was a vaccine, people were getting tested on a regular basis. So I think you have to compromise a little bit here. And then you have those that are totally opposed to the vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers. That's their decision. But they still, in my mind, should get tested for the benefit of all. Restaurants and bars should not have to require that they card you and check you, because all it's done is led to fights, arguments, disputes. The bars and restaurants, the life has already been crushed out of them after the first wave of the lockdowns and the pandemics. And now we know there's so many fake ID cards out there claiming that people are vaccinated. Even Schumer has complained about that, the tens of thousands of fake cards that are available. So why are we putting pressure on the bar owners and the restaurant owners and the nightclub owners when even the police have said, Dermot Shea, the police commissioner, has said, we will not enforce that. Don't call us. So if you're a bar owner, if you're a restaurant owner, if you're a club owner and you have a problem, belligerent patrons who are resisting showing you any kind of paperwork and they won't leave, or they're getting into an argument with you or a fight with your staff, the police have pretty much said, tough noogies, don't call us, we're not coming. So now, what is an owner or an operator to do? If you ask de Blasio or Hochul, they have no answers. You ask the president of the United States, he has no answers about this. It's basically they're saying tough noogies. And again, how is it I can walk into a restaurant, I have to be wearing a mask, but the moment I sit down, I can take the mask?
like the virus takes a time out. Hold on, he's at the table. Let's not infect him right now. I don't get that either. It's pretty silly to me. You know,
it's ridiculous. And yet I can go into a supermarket, a grocery store, a bodega, and I don't have to show any paperwork.
Yeah.
And then people are being told, okay, you shouldn't have to show identification to vote, but you have to show identification to go in and have a sandwich with some French fries. It's like, wait a second. You know, you get vertigo. It's like, none of this makes sense.
Yeah.
None of it
so
makes sense.
now we, you know, we was talking about NYPD a little bit. In light of what happened to George Floyd, do you think that the NYPD need any type of reformation as to how they handle people of color?
Oh, there's no doubt. Look, I'm not a person of color. And you've seen, I got arrested 76 times. I was being targeted. Before they discussed stop, question, and frisk, I was being stopped, questioned, and frisked all the time. And there were no questions, just thrown up against the wall because they didn't believe the guardian angels didn't carry weapons. I know what it's like to be viewed in a hostile manner. I will tell you this. Stop, question, and frisk must be used at times, especially when gangs are at war with one another and they're indiscriminately shooting one another, and then there's a wave of retaliatory shots being fired. The problem with stop, question, and frisk was that when Michael Bloomberg was mayor in his third term, remember, that's the one he stole because he said he was in favor of term limits until he was term limited and drove his way into an additional 4 years. He was ordering the police to actually have quotas for stops and frisks. Mm-hmm. They had 5 250s. That means fill out 5 250 index cards. And they had a quota on stops and frisk, which obviously would be used against people of color, mostly males. That was crazy. They were averaging 750,000 stop and frisk a year at the height of Rudy Giuliani's mayoralty in the beginning, 1993, when crime was at its highest. They were averaging 100,000 stop and frisk. And remember, Rudy was considered the ultimate law and order mayor. But Bloomberg, with him, it was all analytics. He had no touch for the common man, common woman. And remember, when he wanted to run for the presidency, he went to Pastor Bernard's church there on Pennsylvania Avenue and Flatlands Avenue in East New York and begged for forgiveness for overseeing stop and frisk. So I think there's a little bit of a balance here. But yeah, of course, the police department needed reforms, but defunding the police, how has that worked out?
Yeah, it's not good.
Crime, and guess what? Most of that crime is in neighborhoods with people of color. And most of those crimes are not being solved. And then the DAs are not prosecuting. And then every time I go to Rikers Island, I'm there every week talking to the correctional officers. By the way, 80% who are people of color, and most of those people of color are now women. Nobody cares about the correctional officers. All you hear is inmates, inmates, inmates. Well, guess what? The next time elected officials visit the Rock, they should have to go into general population without an escort of correctional officers. Let them get a feel of what it's like to be locked up there or on a tier with all Trinitarios or all Bloods or all Crips or all Latin Kings. It's not what they're making it out to be. You can't let everybody out of Rikers Island into the streets like AOC, all out crazy, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because that is crazy.
Well, let me ask you, how would you, because that was one of my questions for you also, you know, correction officers, they are they working unhealthy hours, like 3 shifts straight is pretty ridiculous. They getting beat up, assaulted, cut, all types of stuff. And I actually got hired by corrections a few years ago, and I declined the job because I just didn't like the direction the department was going in. And from what I understand, they call it a lot of civilian people are making the decisions of what happens on Rikers Island. Like, it's a hands-off policy. I get that. When an inmate is being violent, don't segregate them, keep them in regular segregation. How would you change that as mayor to make it not only safe, because if it's not safe for the officers, it's not safe for the inmates either?
Of course, and who would know that better than Curtis Sliwa, the only person running for any political office who's ever been locked up on Rikers Island. So I have some credibility in this subject. Number one, you take the emotionally disturbed inmates and you put them in psychiatric mental health hospitals. There are 2 of them in New York that are run by the state. Kirby Psychiatric on Randall's Island and Creedmoor in Northern Queens. If you visit there, as I visited there, you will see that there are whole sections that are empty. They're not being utilized at all. They should be repurposed so that if an inmate is diagnosed as being emotionally disturbed, which unfortunately many of them are, they shouldn't be on Rikers. Everybody agrees. The correctional officers agree. Everybody but City Hall and the City Council, because they just keep putting them on Rikers Island. Put them in a separate facility, make sure they're taken care of, make sure they get their medicine so they can be normalized. You would be resolving a lot of the problems of the attacks by inmates on inmates and also inmates on correctional officers. Secondarily, whoever came up with the idea that if a Crip gets arrested, house him with all the Crips, or a Trinitario, house him with all the Trinitarios, that is nuts. That makes no common sense whatsoever. You're just creating little armies on Rikers Island. And then lastly, if you have a disciplinary problem, let's say you have an inmate who's just incorrigible. He's attacking inmates. He's attacking correctional officers. He's an enemy of everyone. You have to be able to put him in a place like solitary confinement. Separate him so he's not a menace to everyone. Now, they say, well, that's inhumane. Well, guess what? They have a section of the prison called protective custody, AKA Punk City, for snitches and for inmates who are very vulnerable to being attacked. They are housed in a ward 23 hours a day in their cell. They get an hour out for a little bit of exercise and get out of that cell. That's a form of solitary confinement. That they choose to be there. They don't want to be in the general population. So solitary confinement is no good, but protective custody is good. Again, having been on the inside looking out, I look at these things and say, these decisions are being made by people who've never been in Rikers Island. They've never been a correctional officer. They've never been an inmate. They have absolutely jack diddly squat, no idea what's going on out there. I would not close Rikers Island. I would knock down some of the buildings that are just too arcane. They can't be rehabbed. But there are some of the facilities. What you can do is rehab them, make sure it has proper circulation, make sure it has some of the modern distinctions that jails have, and keep everyone there and put a court out there so you don't have to bus them to the Bronx and Queens and Manhattan and Staten Island in some instances. You could actually do arraignments and some of the pre-trial hearings right there on Rikers Island, make it a lot easier for everybody.
Now, let me ask you this. You seem to be strong on law and order. How does your law and order message differ from Eric Adams when Eric Adams was a former captain and you are a guardian angel? Like, what is the main difference between you guys' law and order message as mayor?
Well, I would say it's a message to particularly young men who are the gunslingers. Eric Adams says if he's mayor, he's going to carry a gun. He carries a gun to church, and the few times he goes into the subway, he carries a gun because it's so dangerous. Now, again, if you happen to be a young man, you're in a difficult situation where you're surrounded by gangs. There's a lot of pressure on you to carry a gun, if nothing more than to protect yourself. You're hearing the guy who wants to be mayor talking about how you should not carry guns, but he carries a gun. Meantime, Curtis Sliwa, who's been shot 5 times on the orders of John Gotti Sr., the John Gotti Jr., and the Gambino crime family, chooses not to carry a weapon, even though I was offered a carry permit afterwards by the NYPD because they said, we can't protect you from organized crime. I said no, because how am I to be the leader of the Guardian Angels that don't carry weapons all over the world if all of a sudden an exception to the rule is made for me, even though I was a victim of organized crime, and I don't wear a bulletproof vest? So that when I'm talking to a group of young men and they're talking all that macho, phallic nonsense about having a 9mm loaded and that's a sign of manhood, and I'm telling them, hey, guess what? I know you guys like to compare bullet holes. I can compare bullet holes with the best of you. But the idea is not to be shot and not to shoot. The idea is to exercise the muscle between both ears, your brain. It's not about being thoracic and physical and carrying a gun. The idea is don't praise me for getting shot 5 times with hollow point bullets and living, because they consider that the ultimate in machismo. The idea is not to get shot and not to shoot anybody and then destroy your life. And that resonates because they realize, hey, this guy doesn't carry a gun. So let's assume that Eric Adams becomes mayor. He really thinks that that's going to work with young men. Oh, don't carry a weapon. And then they know that he carries a weapon as mayor. Come on. That's like when your parents say don't smoke and they're smoking those Marlboro Reds, or they're telling you don't drink. And then all of a sudden they're pouring themselves some whiskey, or they tell you, hey, don't be rolling those joints or smoking those blunts. And meantime, they're smoking and rolling right in front of you. It's like young people see right through that hypocrisy. And that's the big difference between Eric Adams and Curtis Sliwa.
That's correct. Now, as mayor, you will be able to appoint a police commissioner. Would you appoint a civilian police commissioner?
First off, I would not limit myself to anybody. Eric Adams already has. He says it will have to be a female. So far, he's mentioned mostly African-American women. I have said, in contrast, I've said, wait a second, look at the makeup of the police department now. It's not like when I grew up and it was like almost all Irish. Now, 30% of the ranks are Latinos and Latinas, 30%. About 14% are African-Americans, about 44% are white, about 6 to 8% are Asian. But the largest minority now are Latinos, and they will soon be the majority, including in the city. So how come we're never considering a Latino or a Latina as potentially a police commissioner? And it doesn't mean there has to be a Latin, but they should be considered. They're not being considered. And you want the best man, best woman for the job, whether they happen to be a civilian or they happen to come up through the ranks. I would not want anybody outside of New York City. The Eric Adams people floated 2 names. Police Commissioner Outlaw from Philadelphia, female, originally from Portland, Oregon. First off, I don't know about you, but I don't want a police commissioner's last name being Outlaw. And by the way, he's done a lousy job in Philly. Crime is higher than it's ever been before, and the morale of the police department is at an all-time low. They've also mentioned Best, who was an African-American police commissioner in Seattle. Antifa took over one of her precincts without the cops resisting. Forget that. There are plenty of capable men and women who come up through the ranks. I would not want to recycle a Bratton or a Kelly. You know, we keep talking about, recycle these. No, it's time for new school ways. And as mayor, I would leave the police department alone. If I have a police commissioner, the police commissioner runs the police department. Now, Rudy Giuliani didn't let the police commissioner run the police department. He ran it. Whereas Michael Bloomberg did. He let Kelly run the police department. Bill de Blasio does not let Dermot Shea run the police department. He interferes. I think you have the police commissioner run the police department. If you have your differences, you have a sit down, you have a discussion. And if there's a disagreement you can't resolve behind closed doors, well, then you got to go your separate ways. You may need a new police commissioner, but it shouldn't play out in public as these things always do. And it's not good for the city, and it's not good for the police department or the citizens.
Yeah. Now, change speeds a little bit. Do you support labor unions?
Yeah, I grew up in a labor union household. My father, Chester, 55 years, merchant seaman, delegate to the National Maritime Union, a very radical union. I was raised on Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. which touches on union organizing and the methods that it takes. I believe in collective bargaining. I couldn't understand for the life of me when correctional officers and their union COBA are being forced to work 3 shifts, which you don't even see in third world countries, why other of their fellow brother and sister unions didn't threaten a walkout in sympathy, in support of them. We're not talking a strike and breaking the Taylor law, but just like a flu out, and say, hey, either you address the needs of COBA and the inhumane conditions that our brothers and sisters are forced to work in, or we're going to have a walkout, or we're going to have a sick out. It's been done before. It wasn't even suggested. It's almost as if different unions are taking different paths, different lanes. Look with the mandates. You would think that they would all be joined together. It wouldn't just be the UFT filing one suit, or 1199 filing one suit, or the PBA filing one suit. You think all the unions would put aside their differences and say, for the benefit of our workers, we have to be in solidarity. How can you fire healthcare workers? Think of it. In the pandemic, remember 7 o'clock at night, we were applauding them every night. They were dropping like flies. They were dying. They were getting sick. They were being put on ventilators themselves. They walked into the belly of the beast each and every day. It was Dante's Inferno. We said they're heroes. Now, because they're not vaccinated, we're going to fire them? That's un-American. Yeah, unions should join together in solidarity, and whether it's a work slowdown or walkout, whatever it is, this is the way it was done in the old days. I remember my father, he would be on strike with the National Maritime Union. Nobody crossed that picket line. Nobody crossed that picket line. The moment that changed when Ronald Reagan broke the backs of the air traffic controllers and the other unions were not in support of them, it left every union to be on their own and weakened the union process. And that would be detrimental to the mayor, because obviously, if the unions weren't happy with what I was saying or doing as the mayor, they would use that tactic against me. But that's all fair.
That's exactly. Now, as mayor, you will be negotiating the contracts with different city unions. And a lot of people think that we can afford to live in the city in which we work. But the truth is that our wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. Now, when it comes to you having to negotiate with these unions, would you negotiate what's fair, or would you negotiate what the workers deserve when it comes to their wages alone?
Well, number one, there's this misperception that the mayor negotiates. The mayor is not able to negotiate. The mayor is there in the final process to sign off on a deal or to say no to the deal. So even in the Bloomberg administration, the Giuliani administration, de Blasio administration, no. In fact, look what Rudy Giuliani, the cops were so pissed off at him, they had protests against him. They said, oh, we're heroes and we get zeros, because you have negotiators who go in there. The problem we have coming up now, and nobody wants to talk about it, is de Blasio is leaving a $6 billion lingering debt that will kick off on January 2nd. That's $6 billion that we have to find in the budget, a bloated budget of $100 billion. He took all that stimulus money and he spent it like a drunk sailor, along with Corey Johnson, who is Speaker of the City Council. So there may not be any money. And I know that my adversary, Eric Adams, has promised raises, cost of living increases. I said, wait, let's put the spreadsheets out. Let's see what the de Blasio administration has left behind, because according to what we're seeing now, we may be in a situation like we were in the 70s, when all of a sudden we were on the brink of a fiscal collapse, near bankruptcy. And then Governor Kerry had to put together a financial control board, which consisted of Victor Gottbaum, who led the unions, Felix Roatan, who led Wall Street. They pooled their resources, pension and welfare and banking funds, to bail out the city. But then the mayor had to answer for every nickel, dime, and penny he spent. That was incoming Ed Koch. I think we're heading down that road. I would actually suggest that because of the actions of de Blasio. You can't trust me as mayor. You can't trust Eric Adams as mayor to be fiscally correct and honest. There has to be oversight. I would not mind having a financial control board looking over my shoulder to make sure that I am spending the money that I have, that I'm spending it correctly and spending it fairly, where you have the unions together with Wall Street acting in unison to make sure the mayor is doing the right thing, because clearly de Blasio is not.
So are you saying that Eric Adams is selling people false dreams right now during his campaign?
Well, I think, look, he was in a heated Democratic primary against 12 other opponents, and they were all promising things that they couldn't promise them. Catherine Garcia, Maya Wiley especially, they were the other two who were promising things that there was no money in the budget for. So I would say now that we're in a general election, and I'm not doing that, I'm saying, hey, let's wait to see the damage fiscally that Bill de Blasio has done with his fiscal technology. I would think that Eric Adams has sort of like held back, but I got to tell you, Eric Adams of late, he hasn't been with the unions. He hasn't been in the streets. He hasn't been in the subways. He's been at Club Zero Bond with the TikTok girls, trying to keep up with the Kardashians. I mean, I don't know what's become of this guy who said, I'm the blue collar candidate. The last blue collar he was when he was a rookie police officer graduating from the academy, because he's in Martha's Vineyard, he's in the Hamptons, he vacationed in Monaco. That's like Robin Leach, life of rich and famous. I live on the Upper West Side, the 328 square foot apartment, studio apartment on the ground floor with 17 rescue cats. And my wife, Nancy, was actually running for city council on the Upper West Side. So you know how Curtis Sliwa's living. We don't even know where Eric Adams lives. You can't even pin him down to that. There's no transparency.
All right, so I'm going to change speed one more time. Gentrification in New York City. As mayor, how would you ensure that the income and racial diversity remains in the neighborhood over time? Because it seems like gentrification is moving in. The old folks, the old people is moving out. We can't afford to live in our own communities no more. These buildings is going up everywhere. We being priced out. As mayor, how would you ensure that we would still have part of our community?
Well, one thing I actually admired in the Democratic primary was Andrew Yang, his proposal for universal basic income. I know he was chastised by Eric Adams for that, say, oh, you're a snake oil salesman, you're a charlatan. It's not. Universal basic income has been recommended by libertarians, conservatives, liberals, progressives. That means instead of having this huge, massive social welfare system that sucks up most of the money and it doesn't go to the people, it's like, let's have an experiment and see what happens. Let's give the people the money with no restrictions, because I trust people. I don't trust politicians. And that means you shouldn't trust me either, because the moment I kissed my first baby and shook my first hand, I became a politician. And let's see where this experiment takes us, because we have a massive social service budget, and most of it is not going to the people that it's intended to go for. And so it's going to require that we start experimenting when it comes to housing, the homeless situation, and shoving shelters in neighborhoods. We see that's not working, because all they are warehouses. You got to be in by 10 o'clock at night. That's your curfew. They kick you out in the street at 7:30. And then the rest of the day, you're roaming the streets with an alcohol or drug problem that's not being dealt with, or emotional issues. That's not working. You could repurpose single room occupancy hotels for single able-bodied men or single able-bodied women, but it will have to be good supervision. It can't go back to the days of the single room occupancy hotels when they were flush with drugs and pimps and prostitutes and became a detriment to the community. So there are a lot of options. Now, do I have the answer? No. I'm not pretentious. I'm not omnipotent. I'm more than happy to listen to all different ideas. I'm just simply going to say, how can we do more with less? Because we may not have it in the budget.
Well,
I will say this. I'm not going to be there for the rich developers who want to build brand new developments at Sunnyside Yards, Sunset Park, all of this. We already have millions of square feet of abandoned space. We can repurpose that into affordable housing. But I'm not getting wined and dined and pocket lined by the rich, the developers, the Wall Street, the Fortune 500 executives. That's Eric Adams' lane. That ain't my lane.
Well, let me ask you this, because you said something about experimenting, giving people with money because you trust people, but we don't have to experiment because we could just preserve the subsidized housing that we have now and create more low affordable housing through acquisition and construction, because it's already there, but it just seemed like we don't have access to it. So like in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, in every little space, I don't care how big the space is, it could be the size of a shoebox, a condo is going up there, right? Why we can't make condos for low income people altogether, or just flip it around, 80% low income, 20% whatever salary that you make? Why we can't do that?
Well, they already have that program in effect, and look what you've gotten, nothing. Where they've been promised tax credits if they provide 20% of the apartments for low-income residents compared to the rest that would go to a higher income potential resident. That hasn't been successful. Let's look at NYCHA. They're selling air rights.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Project. Now, come on.
That's crazy.
I'm a putz. Why would you as a developer want to be buying air rights over a NYCHA project? Let's say the Jefferson project, say along the East River, unless you had intentions of doing something with those air rights. So all these deals are being made out of City Hall. My belief system is, I go back to when Jack Kemp was Secretary of HUD, appointed by Ronald Reagan. His idea was rejected by his own Republican Party. He said, we should create it so that the tenants of NYCHA, through small contributions, can end up owning their own apartments, even if it's minimal.
But isn't that like Mitchell-Lama? That's what Mitchell-Lama is, right?
Mitchell-Lama, and notice how many politicians have taken advantage of Mitchell-Lama. The development on 145th, ask Charlie Rangel, ask the Pattersons. I mean, we could go right through it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That was a great program, Mitchell-Lama, but they haven't replicated that. So I'm saying, rather than say, I know what the answer is, I just want to sort of sit back a little bit and let the people's voice be heard and come up with the best plans and experiment a little bit and see which works, which doesn't work. Because every time you hear one of these officials coming forward, they're always pontificating like they're like the Mashiach, the Messiah. They know. Let's face it, they know nothing. What did you get from Cuomo, the worst governor we ever had? What have you gotten from de Blasio, the worst mayor you ever got? How can you lose with Curtis Sliwa over Eric Adams? It's certainly going to be a change from what you've been getting of late. And what you've been getting of late is, as they would say in Yiddish, bupkis, nothing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do a lot of rallies in New York City, and we invite people to come out, politicians. And what irks me the most, and this is why I stop inviting politicians out most of the time, we invite them, they come say what they have to say, and then they leave. No, we invite you so you can listen to the people voices. We're not there to listen to your voices. We don't provide these stages for you to come speak and promote yourself or whatever the case is. We want you, if you go speak, all right, cool. Stick around and listen to some of the conversations that we having on these stages and things like that. And I wanted to salute you about that too, because you came to a memorial service for train operator Goebel, and you spoke and you stuck around and you spoke to people. So I salute you for that. Now, let me ask you a question. With the homeless situation in New York City, you live on the Upper West Side, you said, right?
Yeah, I live off of 87th and Central Park West off of Columbus.
I have a lot of people that live over there. They hit me on Twitter. They hit me on Facebook. The homeless issue over there, the mental health issue, because this is the issue for me. People like to group homeless people with everything. You got mental health, people who have mental health crises that actually have a home to go to. They just go outside the home to create destruction, and they may look homeless. And then some homeless people may not have a mental health issue, right? But how can you fix the homeless issue in New York City? Because I think about it myself, and it seems like one of the most complex issues to find a cure for.
Well, it's a priority for me because I believe I'm the candidate, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of office that is being sought, who's the most compassionate. I've been working with emotionally disturbed persons for 42 years as leader of the Guardian Angels. It's never been worse. These men, these women have been released from mental health care facilities. A lot of them when the lockdown and the pandemic came because they needed the beds. I understand that. We were overwhelmed. Well, we didn't have enough beds, so they released them from state hospitals, from municipal hospitals, even private hospitals that have to carry a certain number of psychiatric care beds. But we never went out to find these people and bring them back and continue to give them compassionate care, and especially their medicine, which is required because it helps normalize them. So now they become a danger to themselves and everyone else. With me, I befriend them, find out about them. Many of them are intelligent. They'll tell you exactly what their problems are. But we have to come up with a remedy. It's our responsibility. And I have to say that in a city that prides itself on being progressive, how could you say you're progressive when we have adults walking the streets or riding the subways or living in parks, wallowing in their own defecation and urine, out of control? They're not in control of their mental or physical faculties. Are we going to blame them for that? No. And when the lockdown and pandemic came, simple common sense, complaints came forward. Oh, they're defecating and urinating on subway platforms, in the trains, in Penn Station, in the streets. And I said to the officials, I said, where do you think they're going to go? You locked all the bathrooms. You locked all the laboratories because you were so frightened of COVID. Instead of cleansing the bathrooms and laboratories so they had a place to go, even a billionaire has to eliminate every day. So there's no compassion for them, for the homeless men and women, the growing number. There used to be a place called Camp LaGuardia, in which if you were a single able-bodied man, they'd ship you up to Orange County. It was a farm. You'd grow your own products. They had a job corps there. They would teach you a skill. You dry out from your alcohol or drug addiction. And then once you had a negotiable skill and you were dried out, then they would say, you want to go back to this city. And you had a more than better chance of staying stable because you were out there, fresh air, where there weren't that many temptations, almost no temptations. We could build a series of Camp LaGuardias. Now, you know who eliminated the Camp LaGuardia program?
Who was that?
Michael Bloomberg. Why? Because he said it was too costly. Oh, I'd rather spend the money on rehabbing people and getting them back on track than spending $2.5 billion to warehouse them in shelters that are not doing anything for these men or women other than giving them a place to stay at night.
So would you segregate people with mental health issues with people that suffer from homelessness? Because that seems like people don't want to go into shelters because of the people with mental health issues. So how would you handle that? You would separate them completely, or what's your plan?
Well, they've already tried that. There are a certain number of shelters they call MICA shelters. That's the other difference between me and Eric Adams and a lot of other people running for other political offices, that they never really go into the shelters, and they see there are all kinds of shelters. There are those for the emotionally disturbed. They call MICA shelters, very dangerous. Then you have those for the battered domestic victims of abuse. Then you have those for gays and lesbians and transgenders because they're always being attacked. Then you have those for homeless people who have pets, because oftentimes they'll stay out in the streets if they're forced to give up their pet. And then you have the typical large armory situation like you have in Washington Heights along Washington Avenue, or you have over in Brooklyn on Bedford Avenue, in which they just like warehouse dozens and dozens of single men, or they put them in dormitories. You don't put emotionally disturbed persons in homeless shelters. It ain't helping them. It's not going to be good for the community that they're in. They need to be in a mental health care facility where they're getting psychiatric observation and they're getting their medicine. You can't provide that in a shelter. They think they can in the MICA shelters, but it's been an abysmal failure.
All right. I got 3 short questions for you. I only want short answers, and then I'm gonna let you end it off. And they random questions by me. How do you feel about the Central Park 5?
It was a mistake, and I made a mistake. I was one that assumed that they had done that. I apologized. Obviously, Donald Trump never did. That was a big mistake.
Do you like macaroni and cheese?
I used to love macaroni and cheese. Now I have Crohn's disease. I can't deal with the cheese.
All right. Do you think you could beat Eric Adams in the push-up contest?
Probably not in the push-up contest. You know, he's buff, but I'd love to take him in the ring because I can knock him, no doubt. He's a pretty boy. If you notice, he's always smiling, right? And those guys that smile, you hit them once in the schnozola, they start bleeding and they're like Mama Luke's.
All right, final question. Why should people vote for Curtis Sliwa 2021 mayor in the mayoral election?
Very simple. I'm a man of the people. I'm in the streets and I'm in the subways. My focus group are people who need to be heard. And as mayor, that's where I'm going to be mayor, in the streets and in the subways. You're not going to find me in City Hall. Nothing but trouble takes place in City Hall because that's where you get wine-dined and pocket-lined by the lobbyists. Guess what? The lobbyists don't ride the subways and they don't walk the streets. So I have plenty of time for the peeps.
Thank you, Mr. Sliwa. Thanks for taking the time out your busy schedule. I see you pounding the pavement. Good luck to you in this upcoming election. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And hopefully we'll speak to you one more time before, things get heated up. Maybe I'll bring out the equipment and we'll meet you in the field and let the people see you in the field. We'll cover you that way.
Well, yeah, come out with me in the projects at night when I'm doing vertical patrols that the cops don't do anymore. And nobody wants to be in the stairwells of the public housing complexes.
Yeah, I'd like to say thanks to your sister also for reaching out to me and saying, I want my brother on the show. And, she kept her word. You here, and we good. Thank you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right, thanks. Okay, guys, hold on. I'm gonna pause Mr. Sliwa for a second. Mute him for a second. So yeah, we just had our first mayoral candidate, Curtis Sliwa, come on the show. I had scheduled Eric Adams a couple of months ago, but his schedule is busy also. So hopefully I'll get him up here soon now that I had Curtis here. I hope that this was very informational to you guys. I hope that he answered some of you guys' questions. I love his energy, and I wish him the best. Thanks for tuning in to the Progressive Action TV show. Share out this show. I'll catch you guys later. And donate to the platform, Cash App, Progressive Action 100. Catch you guys later.